Good morning. I've heard it said, no one has ever been brought to faith because of an argument. Well, first of all, I think that this statement is overgeneralized. However, let's take the statement for what it's meaning rather than just what it says. What it's meaning is that argumentation and evidence plays no role in somebody being brought to faith. Now, I disagree with this position, and Lee Strobel, author of Case for Faith, also seems to disagree when he says, but faith isn't always easy, even for people who desperately want it. Some people hunger for spiritual certainty, yet something hinders them from experiencing it. They wish they could taste that kind of freedom, but obstacles block their path. Objections pester them, doubts mock them. Their hearts want to soar to God. Their intellects keep them securely tied down. That evidence and logical debate and scientific evidence don't matter in terms of salvation. They don't. Nobody has to believe in a 6,000-year creation to be a Christian. Nobody has... those are not requirements. However, people have genuine intellectual objections to faith. And here, I'm going to show how giving evidence, the Christian giving evidence, is not only biblical, but it's also beneficial to the Christian, and it's also beneficial to the non-believer. So let's go ahead and take our first point, that it is biblical. Okay, giving sound reason for faith in Jesus is biblical both implicitly and explicitly in the Bible. 1 Peter 3:15 tells us to give a reason for the hope that we have, but to do it with gentleness and respect. And Paul regularly used argumentation when he was on all of his missionary journeys. A great example of that is in Acts 13 through 48, when he is in Pisidia, Antioch. He gives a whole dissertation of creation, Moses, on down through the line to Jesus, to show that Christ was indeed the Messiah, foretold back, in the Genesis and Exodus periods of time even. Christ even uses argumentation in his dealings with his disciples and even the Pharisees. In Luke 24:25 through 27, he appeals to the prophecies that he fulfilled out of the Old Testament. In John 14:11, he appeals to the evidence of his miracles, all the stuff that he did and yet to do later on when he rises from the dead. Therefore, if we are instructed by Peter, the cornerstone that Christ built his church on, and by the examples of Christ, as Christians, we are saying to the world that we're trying to imitate, and Paul, arguably the greatest apostle, all these people are telling us that we should be following the example of presenting reason or argument for the reason for our faith. So we should be following that example. But not only is it biblical, it's also beneficial to the individual believer. Now, Dr. William Lane Craig, in his book On Guard, quotes that people who lack training in apologetics are often afraid to share their faith or speak out for Christ out of fear that somebody might ask them a question. But if you know the answers, then you're not afraid to go into the lion's den. In fact, you'll enjoy it. Training in apologetics will help to make you a bold and fearless witness for Christ. Now, I threw a new word at you there, or possibly a new word, apologetics. That comes from a Greek word, apologio, which means to defend. We're not apologizing that we're Christians. We are defending our faith. And knowing some arguments, some philosophical arguments, some scientific arguments, some historical arguments, will give the individual believer great confidence when approaching an evangelism opportunity. They're not going to be afraid to say, "Hey, do you know Jesus? Who is Jesus? He never existed. That's bunk. That never happened." Well, you can give, if you know some historical arguments for the credibility of the New Testament and the existence of Jesus, you're not afraid to answer that question. Say, no, actually, Tacitus, Josephus are some outside sources that said Jesus existed. It's not just the New Testament. And taken in whole, the New Testament's just as reliable as any other. In fact, more so, more reliable than any other ancient document, just from the multiplicity of them. But I'm not here to go into each individual argument and evidence. So we have history, we have textual criticism, we have philosophy, we have even science, points to God. We have all this myriad of things for us to study, to get to know God. There's not really a field out there that we can't enjoy the study of God with. In Romans 1:20, Paul describes God made himself known throughout creation, so nobody's without an excuse is the purpose of it. But there's also another way that we can look at it. We can look at it that God is inviting us to find him. God's inviting you to find him in the study of nature. So when you have to take your anatomy and physiology class, if you're taking a philosophy or psychology class here at CCU, you can look at it as trying to search out God through his creation. There's nothing anti-biblical about that. In fact, I think it's a very biblical way to look at it. So not only are we biblically supposed to look for give reason for the hope that we have, but it's also beneficial for us personally in our relationship with God to find reason for the hope that we have. Next, we need to give reason for the unbeliever. Christ told us that we need to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, mind, and strength. Well, I think we should probably share the gospel the same way. With our heart, we should be sharing our stories with our unbelieving friends. And we should be listening with sensitive and empathetic ears to their stories and sharing the gospel in that context. With our strength, with our bodies, we should be going out and helping fill the felt needs of the world around us. And with our mind, we need to search out and show the evidence wherever we can find it for the existence of our loving God and his son Jesus. Now, some of you still say that you can't argue someone to faith. And I agree, you can't argue somebody to faith. That's the Holy Spirit's work. It's ultimately between that person and the Holy Spirit. But presenting a reason can help clear out some intellectual baggage. First, giving a reason is biblical. Jesus did it, Paul did it, Peter told us to do it. So we should do it. Second, it's beneficial to us. It's beneficial to the believer to study God's creation. And finally, we need to know the reasons and the answers to give to our unbelieving friends for the hope that we have. It is our jobs as Christians to sow and reap. But how are we going to sow and reap if we do not have the tools? Therefore, equip yourself with the tool of reason. Thank you.